Algeria, a land born from fire and blood. In 1962, after 132 years of French colonial rule, the people broke their chains in one of the bloodiest wars of the 20th century. But the dream of independence would soon give way to new struggles. The National Liberation Front, the FLN, emerged as the sole ruler of independent Algeria. Heroes of the liberation struggle became rulers of the new nation. At first, prosperity seemed within reach. Oil and gas wealth funded schools, hospitals, and housing. But beneath the surface, corruption festered, and power remained in the hands of a few. By the 1980s, falling oil prices crippled the economy. Youth unemployment soared. Basic goods grew scarce. The people began to question the legitimacy of their rulers. In October 1988, the anger erupted. Protests swept across Algeria. The army opened fire. Hundreds were killed. But the bloodshed forced the FLN to make a fateful concession: democracy. The FLN has betrayed the revolution. They steal from the people, while we suffer. Islam is the solution. Within months, the FIS swept municipal elections, controlling Algeria's towns and cities. For the first time in decades, the people felt change was possible. In December 1991, Algeria held its first free parliamentary elections. The turnout was massive. The results, overwhelming. The Islamic Salvation Front was on the verge of total victory. For millions, this was democracy in action. But for the ruling elite, it was a nightmare. In January 1992, the army cancelled the elections. The FIS was banned. Its leaders jailed. Overnight, the dream of democracy was shattered. Protests erupted. Clashes spread. Thousands of FIS supporters disappeared into prisons. Others fled to the mountains, to wage a new kind of struggle. Thus began a decade of fire. Algeria had opened the door to democracy, only to slam it shut. What followed was a war without mercy. A war that would claim nearly 200,000 lives, and stain the land with blood. This was the beginning of Algeria's Black Decade. In January 1992, the ballot boxes were silenced by the crack of gunfire. The people's choice was stolen, and the dream of democracy vanished into smoke. Algeria stood at the edge of a cliff. And then, it fell. With the Islamic Salvation Front banned, its leaders jailed, and thousands of supporters hunted down, a dangerous transformation began. The opposition went underground. For many, democracy had failed. Only armed struggle remained. Two factions emerged. The Islamic Salvation Army, AIS, claimed to defend the banned FIS. But another, more radical force was rising. The Armed Islamic Group, or GIA. Between 1992 and 1994, Algiers became a city of fear. Car bombs shattered marketplaces. Journalists, artists, and intellectuals were gunned down in broad daylight. Foreigners became targets, accused of propping up the regime. The state responded with an iron fist. Tens of thousands were arrested. Prisons overflowed. Families waited at night for the dreaded knock on the door. Across Algeria, disappearances multiplied. Some would never return. Others came back broken from torture. By 1993, Algeria was no longer at the brink of war. It was at war. Insurgents attacked police, soldiers, and officials. The government struck back with ruthless force. Civilians became collateral in a battle neither side intended to spare them from. By 1994, Algeria was consumed by fear. Tens of thousands lay dead. Cities lived under curfew, villages under siege. The Armed Islamic Group grew bolder, more brutal. The government grew harsher, more unyielding. The line between victim and enemy blurred. And yet, the darkest years had not even begun. The inferno was only warming. Ahead lay massacres so unspeakable that the world would call it the Black Decade. By 1994, the war had spread beyond the shadows of Algiers. It crept into the mountains, the villages, the very heart of daily life. The struggle was no longer between ballots and bullets. It had become a war without limits. The Armed Islamic Group, the GIA, emerged as the fiercest force in the insurgency. Unlike the AIS, which claimed to target the state alone, the GIA declared all who opposed them as enemies: journalists, foreigners, artists, even ordinary villagers. 1995 became the year of the bombs. In the heart of Algiers, markets, cafes, and buses turned into killing grounds. The GIA vowed to make every street unsafe, and every foreigner a target. The state retaliated with crushing force. Special forces swept through neighborhoods, rounding up suspects by the thousands. Torture chambers filled. Villages were encircled with barbed wire. Entire communities became prisons. Between 1994 and 1996, tens of thousands vanished. Swallowed by secret prisons, their families left with only silence. The war was not only against bodies, but against minds. Writers, poets, and musicians who dared to speak out were silenced. Each bullet aimed not just at a person, but at Algeria's soul. Cheb Hasni, the voice of Rai music, was gunned down at 26. His death sent shockwaves through the nation. It was a message: no art, no voice, no dissent was safe. By 1995, the GIA shifted their wrath to the countryside. Villages accused of collaborating with the army were struck with unimaginable cruelty. Entire families, wiped out in the dark. Algeria was gripped by paranoia. At night, the GIA stalked the villages. By day, the army hunted insurgents. Civilians were trapped between two merciless giants, accused by one, punished by the other. Trust dissolved. Fear became the air everyone breathed. The world began to take notice. Journalists who dared to enter told of bombed markets, charred villages, and unspeakable massacres. Algeria was descending into something darker than war, a terror that consumed both sides. And yet, the years to come would bleed even redder. What began as assassinations and bombs would soon erupt into horrors so vast, entire communities would vanish in a single night. Algeria's Black Decade was only deepening. Into the inferno. Between 1996 and 1998, Algeria descended into the darkest nights of its history. The war between state and insurgents gave way to something far worse: massacres that spared neither women, nor children, nor the unborn. On August 29, 1997, the village of Rice, just outside Algiers, was encircled. Hundreds of armed men poured in, armed not just with rifles, but with axes, machetes, and fire. By sunrise, more than 200 lay dead. Rice was not the first massacre. And it would not be the last. Only weeks later, Bentalha became another killing field. For hours, attackers went house to house. No one came to help. The army, stationed nearby, never moved. The massacres raised a chilling question: how could armed groups strike so deeply, so close to army barracks, without resistance? Some whispered of complicity. Others of deliberate abandonment, to break the insurgents by terrorizing their support base. Massacres multiplied across the countryside. Entire families erased. Villages left as ghost towns. The GIA claimed responsibility for many. Others remained shrouded in mystery. Each atrocity deepened Algeria's wounds. Yet the GIA's cruelty began to devour itself. Its leaders ordered killings not only of civilians, but of rival Islamists. Trust within their ranks withered. Fighters deserted, horrified by the blood on their hands. By 1998, Algeria was a land of ashes. Villages abandoned. Cities scarred by bombings. The people broken by grief. It was no longer a question of who was winning, but whether there would be anything left to save. The years of blood had consumed tens of thousands. And as the GIA fractured and the government pressed harder, a new path began to emerge, not through victory, but through exhaustion. The war had reached its peak. Now, both sides searched for a way out. By 1997, Algeria was a nation on its knees. Tens of thousands had been killed. Entire villages erased. Cities scarred by bombs. The people no longer spoke of victory or defeat. They spoke only of survival. After 5 years of slaughter, exhaustion spread like a shadow. The fighters in the mountains were weary. The civilians in the cities were broken. Even within the insurgency itself, doubt began to grow. The Armed Islamic Group, once feared across the land, began to collapse. Its massacres had alienated the very people it claimed to defend. Fighters deserted in waves, ashamed of the rivers of blood. In 1997, the Islamic Salvation Army, the AIS, made a bold move. Declaring a unilateral ceasefire, it ordered its fighters to halt attacks on civilians and the state. It was not surrender, but a plea for mercy. The people, silenced for years, found their voice in grief. From the capital to the villages, their plea was the same: enough. Let the killing end. In 1999, a familiar figure returned to the stage, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, once a foreign minister of the FLN. He promised not war, but reconciliation. In 1999, the Civil Concord Law was passed. It offered amnesty to thousands of insurgents who laid down their arms. For the first time in years, guns fell silent in many parts of Algeria. By the turn of the century, the war's fire dimmed. The massacres slowed. The bombings decreased. Algeria breathed again, not in triumph, but in exhaustion. Peace had returned, fragile and uneasy. But peace built on silence is fragile. For the families of the disappeared, for the victims of the massacres, justice never came. And in the shadows, small groups refused to surrender, vowing that Algeria's war was not over. The new millennium dawned on Algeria with fragile hope. The guns were quieter. The bombs less frequent. The nation, weary and scarred, began to rebuild. After nearly a decade of darkness, Algeria rediscovered fragments of normal life. Children filled classrooms once emptied by war. The call to prayer was no longer drowned by gunfire. Yet, beneath the calm, wounds ran deep. Tens of thousands had vanished, taken by security forces, or swallowed by the militias. Mothers searched graveyards and prisons, clinging to fading hope. The Civil Concord freed thousands of men who had once fought. For many survivors, this was a wound reopened. There were no trials, no truth commissions. Only silence. A peace built on forgetting. Though the war had ended, not all had surrendered. Some factions, bitter and defiant, refused peace. In the deserts of the south, the remnants of the GIA and radical holdouts transformed into a new threat, the Salafist group for preaching and combat. Later, they pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda, becoming AQIM, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. By 2002, large-scale fighting had faded. But the war had left scars that would not heal. A generation had grown up with death as their lullaby. Trauma lingered in homes, in villages, in the very silence of the streets. Algeria rebuilt. Its people moved forward, not forgetting, but surviving. The Black Decade, as it came to be known, ended without victors. The state had survived, but the cost was immense, over 150,000 dead, countless others broken. The Algerian civil war left behind no heroes, only survivors. A conflict born of politics and betrayal, fueled by ideology and vengeance, had consumed a nation. And though the war ended, its shadows remain, in the silence of the disappeared, in the memories of the living, and in the deserts where the embers of extremism still burn.